going to do is I've got some sort of specific questions to ask of the panel based on their area of expertise, but what we want to try to do is sort of have a cross-pollination of ideas through this. And did anyone read the Globe and Mail yesterday? Lynn brought my attention to the article in the Globe yesterday morning version. No? She will educate you about that. Yes. So, and the reason I'm asking is we're starting to see more of the media starting to talk about this topic. All of a sudden we've discovered that, oh, there's people with disabilities. Oh, didn't realize that was the case. So there's more awareness, and then now the next step is how do we include people with disabilities in all aspects of life, including the workplace. Now, there's a few things. So diversity and inclusion. Are there any people here from the D&I, diversity and inclusion areas? How do you define, just in terms of trying to get some definitions? Yes.
Equity and access to employment and sort of gainful employment and maintaining that over time.
Right.
Proper representation that isn't just sort of tokenized.
Okay. So I don't know if any of you have come across, in larger organizations, there's actually people, it's often a subset of human resources, and they're either called D&I or I&D, so diversity and inclusive, and their mandate is actually to try to make the workforce more diverse and sort of reflective of the greater society. So that's a position that you're probably going to be hearing more about. And one of the questions that was put in here is, does Canada and Toronto-based companies, do they get a passing grade? We'll come back to that, actually. I think some of our discussion may bring that out. So I'll start off with Ricardo. It seems, to my mind, as an ergonomist and human factors design specialist, designers of software and hardware, such as that at Microsoft, they always seem to include information and data about the human or the end user. This includes tapping into the data about ergonomics, human factors at Microsoft to ensure that their products, websites, services, software meets the needs of what we refer to as people of all abilities. So why has Microsoft made that an important part of their mandate?
At Microsoft, our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. That's the Microsoft mission as a company. We have 140,000 employees in 190 countries all working together for this mission, empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. When I say every person, we're talking about 7.4 billion people. And it does include people with disabilities, which, by the way, is the largest minority in the world. 1.3 billion people, to be more precise. 1.3 billion people with disabilities. It's almost the population of China. In Canada, 6.2 million people, of a population of 37 million people. So if someone thinks that this is not a relevant topic, it is like, I'm not going to do business with 1 out of 5 potential customers. And that's something that we think inside Microsoft as a potential market that brings so many potential for us. And I'm going to just explore a few examples. The first is the mindset that people have around this topic, in which I think it's not the right mindset. Environments and tools are disabled. Environments and tools are disabled, not people. And we think that people are disabled. It's the opposite. And when you think from this mindset, you realize that this is a design solvable challenge that drives innovation. How we make software and products that adapt to people, not the opposite. And when you make it work, guess what? We innovate. We not only include this untapped market, but we create innovation for everyone. We all experience disabilities, we all. And if you are not part, you'll be one day, I tell you. 80% of people with disabilities, they develop a disability between 18 to 64. And we are aging. And more children are born with disabilities as well. So the overall population in this topic is just going to grow and grow and grow. And this is not bad. This is just a new mindset that we need to have in place now to, one, untap this market opportunity and make it work. So this conversation is relevant because the unemployment rate for persons with disabilities is 2 times higher compared to persons without disabilities. And the ones employed are underemployed just because of perspective that we have. The mindset that there are 2 types of human beings, a human being with ability and a human being with disabilities. So at Microsoft, we don't think in this way. And that's one of the things that I try to bring awareness for this topic and the opportunity that is in front of all of us that unfortunately not many people are experiencing and make it work.
So that we talked just before coming up on stage, and that concept, just to get your heads around, because we always think of the person as being disabled, when in fact, is there something in the design that's actually disabling people? And you could probably think, all of us, of examples where we thought we were quite abled, but there was maybe software that we used, or hardware, or trying to wayfind through a building where we actually became disabled. How many of you have ever gotten lost in the path system?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
stairs make the building accessible, not the wheelchair. It's the opposite. Stairs make the building accessible, not the wheelchair. Just this mindset. That's what we call human-centric design. Look human. And I believe from a diversity and inclusion perspective, that's why I'm so passionate about the topic around persons with disabilities. If you make it work for persons with disabilities, it's going to work from gender, LGBT+, First Nations, all the different minorities, if you address the most extreme one, which is disability. Extreme from our mindset, right? And yeah, I can spend like hours talking about this. I'm going to stop and let.
No, the passion is there, and it's starting to make a difference for people that have listened to you, which is very important. So I'm going to pick on Marcia next. Marcia. Thank you. Yeah, the Brady Bunch. That's right. So there's been a good deal of progress when we take a look at Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and the built environment. So there's several other countries, G20 countries, that are very far ahead of Canada. And I even think of when we had the Parapan Games here not too long ago, and sort of felt embarrassed as a Torontonian in terms of our built environments, and were we really welcoming of the para-athletes or not. So we know that Europe, Australia, UK, that we lag behind, and that some more progressive companies are starting to unlock the power of human potential through building and office designs, where they actually incorporate the human factor or human-centered design, irrespective of ability, age, culture, language. So it's starting to actually show measurable benefits when this is actually happening. So Marcia, as a facility management expert in Toronto, do you see corporate real estate and your whole industry actually starting to make the moves that are required to no longer disable people?
Okay, that's a big topic.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, I am a building specialist, okay? However, my forte, my wheelhouse is that integration in dealing with buildings and people. Think about this. Did you realize 90% of our time are spent in buildings? I'm not even talking about your office, I'm talking about home, right? Or in a shopping mall. How much time do you actually spend in a building? And you have ever envisioned your local mall, your local shopping center, and you say, I wish it was a little bit more accessible. Did it ever come out of your mouth? I bet you all the time. I do it all the time. Every time I go into a building. My lenses are on from an air quality, noise, accessibility, and I look at it from a physical perspective. And I'm talking about my own disabilities. I have vertigo, okay? So my challenges in dealing with staircases is major, right? So I look at other ways of getting to other floors in a building, right? So you say, well, Marcia looks normal, but you know what? Get me in a set of stairs and I go nuts, right? So again, this is what I look for in a building. So you think about it, we're 90% of our time in our buildings, and I live and breathe in a building because I love buildings, okay? But our existing buildings have major issues because of issues dealing with diversity and dealing with people, right? People need access to buildings, right? And you think about your own buildings or office buildings, how accessible it is or isn't right now. Now, our legislation, as you're probably aware, has the AODA and has the Interior Building Code, so I'm talking buildings, yes, and has the design of open space from a buildings-wise, right? But the problem and the challenge is the money. If you're dealing with an existing building, you live in an existing building, or you work in an existing building, and you say to your boss, you know what, we need to have a more diversified workforce, the number one issue is going to be money. So the challenge you're going to have, right, today, and more so today, is figuring it out, how do you, from an HR-wise, is bringing in that diverse workforce and ensuring that the workplace can accommodate these variances and adapting for people with disabilities. And I'm not talking about, and I know Jane talks about this and Ricardo will talk about it, but we're just not talking about wheelchairs, right? We're not talking about walkers. We're not talking about canes. We're talking about mental disabilities as well, right? And we're also talking about, I'm talking about diseases we can't even see. So how do you help those individuals in a physical environment, right? I understand the healthcare side, and I understand what Ontario brings from a healthcare service. I'm talking about the physical side now. So you look at probing lights, for example, in case of an emergency in a building, is really essential with regards to the safety of your occupants or your customers or your employees. So ensuring these kind of minimal things that sometimes on the people side we forget and say, oh, I'm glad that, you know, there's a fire truck going down. There's some means of notification of knowing that there's a problem, right? But we take that for granted sometimes as people. We only realize when there's a problem, there's a problem. So yes, we're a little bit behind, but we're all trying together with regards to increase the diversity with regards to their workplace. And by doing that, we have to make sure that our buildings are safe, in good condition, and adaptable, right? And to be able to deal with these needs. So, in fact, this morning I was at a facility, and pristine as you can imagine, okay, and I'm gonna call it a Class A building. And I went in, and it was, I was surprised. I walked in, and it was a door. They didn't have a camera there. And they said, who is this? And I said, it's Marcia, and I need to go see so-and-so. I walk in, and there was a set of stairs. I said, holy cow. Fear factor already went in before I even went into the building. And I actually told them when I went in. I said to them, you realize I'm a Joe Public. And I said, I could have walked the other way. And I'm not the only one that has this vertical issue. You don't know anyone else. All you see is steep stairs, doesn't know where it's go. There's no wayfinding, there's no signage. Basic, I'm talking about basic stuff that we can do to help people with the disabilities. Now, where are we gonna end this? I could be like Ricardo, I can talk about buildings, but there are some initiatives that have been started in Ontario and Canada, and one of them is the WELL standard. Have you heard of the WELL standard? Right? We know that Cadillac Fairview started that down on Bay Street with TD Canada Trust. And what you're talking about of motivating individuals and employees, getting them involved, getting them more involved in physical activities, right? And what we're looking at is comfort levels about employees and as well as your public coming into your facilities. And the other one that we'd like to promote as well is Fit Well, because it is looking at the building and improving the building, and it focus 100% on the people, on the employees and your public, and accessing the building and getting, again, as much people or individuals into your facilities. So end on that.
See, it's nice to hear about the built environment, because there's not a lot of information and discussion about that part of it, and it's critical. So now we've got Mike the baseball guru. So anyone that wants help with their pitching arm.
There you go.
You've done some work with the Blue Jays.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. See,
Yeah.
he's very low-key about this. So in terms of Mike's expertise, and this is a frustration for any of us who are in the field of ergonomics and human factors design, and in part, I actually blame our own professional group for not allowing people to understand what it is and how do you use the science about the human being and how do you design for those people. So Mike's a perfect person in this topic. So most people don't have a good understanding. These days, as soon as someone hears the word ergonomics, and I don't know if you avoid using that term because people just say, oh, it's a chair and sitting upright. That's actually a very, very tiny part of what the science is all about. Can you give us an example of human factors design work you've been involved in where the environment, cognitive, mental demands, all of those things are considered in the design process?
Definitely. So one of the roles I've taken on in my career was a postdoctoral research fellow for Ford Motor Company. And Ford does a really, really good job of trying to be upfront with their production ergonomics. So what I mean by that is Ford will typically model their entire assembly line in a three-dimensional space and then immerse different anthropometric mannequins into that space.
Okay, and everyone know what anthropometrics is?
It's your height, your weight, how long your arms are. With this Ford group, we had a mannequin that was like 25th percentile height with 90th percentile hand size. So we could both get reaches as well as getting into the nooks and crannies of the vehicle.
And so you said 25th percentile?
Yes.
For height?
Yes.
So how tall would that person be?
I think that was around like 5'1" or something of that nature.
So you want to look at what the smallest person is going to do, but then you want the person with, remember Seinfeld talked about man hands? So you want the person with the big hands to be able to reach into small spaces.
Definitely. So the real success that Ford saw when they tried to accommodate for as much of the workplace as they possibly could in their design was that cost of injuries went down, productivity went up, and then the cost of retrofitting or fixing their assembly facilities went way, way, way down. So being upfront and understanding the population that might be doing the job, that's really, really helpful, not just from an injury prevention perspective, but from a hiring perspective. And what we're seeing kind of in the modern workplace is that people are becoming either super, super, super specialized or are expected to do absolutely everything. And in both of those cases, you know, if you're looking to hire, you're looking to build your business and you're looking to expand your workforce, if you're excluding any part of that population, you could, you know, if you're excluding somebody based on a physical criterion, you may lose out on a great candidate that has the skill set to perform that work. So both from, you know, the blue collar assembly line type work or warehouse work, trying to accommodate in those spaces is very, very vital. But then as you go up in terms of complexity and specialization, you know, it's not just that physical space any longer that you need to be focused on. It's some of what Ricardo's working on the software interface, and that, you know, if you have somebody who's very, very skilled in their field, but their software doesn't allow them to interact with the programs they need, you know, you're losing out on that person's skill set. And from a pretty cold capitalistic perspective even, you know, you're hurting your business by not having that ability to accommodate.
Yeah. Do you mind?
No, please.
A common topic that I see from Michael in Marcia, it's about adaptation, not accommodation. And I heard the same when I had the privilege to meet Carla Coltrot, the Minister for Accessibility in Canada. I was sharing accommodation best practices, and she said, can I quote you? Please avoid using the word accommodation. Use adaptation instead. Accommodation is after the fact. It's always a cost. It's an exception. And no one wants to raise their hand to say, I need accommodation. And when you approach, as Marcia and Mike mentioned, doing this from the very beginning, from an adaptation perspective, you embrace humans with all the full perspective and what they can contribute. And that's a game changer.
I like that, because so many departments that we become involved in as ergonomists in office environments, many of the departments are called accommodation department.
Yeah.
And people have to self-identify, and they may not necessarily want to do so, but in order, find that it's become medicalized disability instead of thinking about function and adaptability. So how many of you in your workplaces, if you need, for example, a new chair, how many of you actually have to get a doctor's note to prove you have a disability? It's a really common practice, and what that's doing is using a medical model instead of why not believe the employee and adapt their environment so that we have employees that are comfortable and productive.
Because people treat it as a personal health condition, not as a mismatched human interaction. That's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just building on that, it's the prevention versus the reaction model in general, right? And that can be not even about an injury. It can manifest in many different ways. Like if we're talking about injury in the workplace, you're talking about reported injury, right? And a lot of times people are not going to go and report an injury, but you will see that their productivity drops, their overall disposition, those things that make you enjoy your life get impacted significantly. But if you make you make the capacity of the workplace adapt to the worker, that's when you start winning and you start seeing improvements across the board. Like the bare concepts of reducing force, reducing repetition, reducing extreme postures that we preach about, whether it's in ergonomics or it's in looking at the injury in sport. Those concepts, if you abide by those, you accommodate more individuals, you make the workplace much more accessible to everyone.
So why is it not translating? So in your experience and in my experience, because we've done a lot of work with industry as well, why is it not translating into office environments? This whole notion of why should we do this up front? Because I can say in my practice, and Lynn would probably be able to find the same thing, less than 10% of the work we conduct is up front at the design table sitting beside the designers. So why is that not translating?
I think it actually comes down to the cost of real estate. It comes down to money, right? And think about today's workplace trends. We're looking at reducing real estate, not increasing real estate. So I think of diversity, and everyone's not created the same, as we just said, from height and width, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone's not exactly the same. So everyone is kind of be putting into a little pigeonhole. If you think about your workplace today, at one point in time, you might have had an office, you might have had a desk, right? Today, you're gonna have to book a desk, to be able to get the accommodation you need. And then when you book a desk, guess what? It's supposed to meet your needs, because you can't adjust the chair, you can't adjust the table, because you just booked, like booking a room at a hotel, right? You're booking a space to work for the day, right?
Or seeing this from a total cost of ownership. I'll give an example. My wife had the wonderful idea of inviting all the kids from the daycare for a birthday party for my son in March this year, March 12th. It was still cold. 15 kids. And she forgot that one of the kids used wheelchair. And it's a problem because where we live in Oakville, we have stairs at home. The washroom is not accessible. Kids play upstairs or at the basement. Like all the houses in Oakville, by the way, and many houses in Canada. And I realized right away that I was not the only one with this problem. But we ended up having this conversation to say, where are we going to do this party? It's not going to work here. And then I reached out to many places where you can do parties, this, if you have kids. All of them accessible, but not a place where kids using wheelchair could play. I ended up calling the daycare, and they introduced me to their parents. And I called his parent. They told me, thank you for calling. This is the first time my little one is invited for a birthday party. Aww. If you ask what inclusion means to many people, you're going to hear many different versions. Mm-hmm. Exclusion, we all understand. You were like, oh, we understand. That's the common denominator, is exclusion. Mm-hmm. Long story short, because I always forget, we had the party, everything was fine, the kids played. I tell you that one day I finished up, people all came, oh, what happened? Everything was fine. But here's we chose a place for a party with 50 people that was accessible. And it was a business opportunity. That design that they created not only was inclusive, but helped them to bring more business. And that's the realization when people think about cost, is they don't realize the demand that is in there, or consider the total cost of ownership of adjustments that you need to make over time to accommodate and fix a place that was not conceived and designed to welcome the people. And when they put all these numbers, they would see that it would be cheaper for them, cheaper by far, doing this by design at the beginning. So having this understanding of the demand and who you're going to serve, and having the right stakeholders at the conversation, it's key to build a building, a chair, a desk, a computer, a software. No matter what you think, this concept can be applied for universal and inclusive design in everything we do.
So Ricardo, you picked a really good point. I was talking to some owners of some buildings, and it was interesting. You said the dollars is there, but it's a perception. And exactly what Ricardo said. I said, have you really looked at the data? Have you actually looked at the cost with regard to how much it's costing your employees from absenteeism, non-productivity, complaints, right? And he goes, no, what are you talking about? I know that if I'm going to do this, this, and this, here's what's going to call me from a retrofit. I said, you need to look all at your data. Put all your data together, do your research, and then come up with your practical solution. Yeah. And Ricardo is exactly right. I only said that to I know everyone thinks it's dollars, but it's not just the dollars. You got to look at some of the value and the benefits of adjusting your facilities.
So do you do an ROI analysis for them?
Yes. Yeah, because you need the proof to go to council, you need to go to your board, because no one else is going to believe you, because they could, what do you mean? Of course it's going to cost more money at the end of the day, right? There's this perception.
In ways that can help, you can bring this from a moral, business, and legal perspective. I call fear, love, and money.
I love it. I love it.
Fear, love, and money. You're not going to do this. There is a legislation. You're going to be sued. Okay, tell me more. Or you're not going to do this. Let me tell the example of Kate, or example, real people. Describe the example of how this person is going to struggle, and give numbers behind of this person and many more. And tell, if you build an automatic door, someone in Canada holding a Tim Hortons double-double in a laptop can go easily without any problem. This is going to help this person as well, someone using a wheelchair. It's always like this conversation of fear, love, and money. Bring this. It helps.
Good. It's a good takeaway.
Yeah. I was just going to share like a kind of a positive story on this front about ergonomists being involved in the design process, particularly in office space. So one of the research projects that I worked on was like an objective office ergonomics assessment tool, where it gave you a score between 1 and 10 to identify the potential risk of having increased discomfort. And we did that study close to 10 years ago. This past year, we were saying, let's look at redoing this study to update it with modern office equipment. Right. So we did that study with our partners at Hamilton Health Sciences. Well, Hamilton Health Sciences has adopted a lot of what you're talking about, kind of these book a workstation type environments.
Right.
So they've created these spaces, so you don't necessarily have your own dedicated desk. But what they did was they really relied heavily on their internal ergonomists to help them in the design process. So from the research perspective, we did this study, and our problem was we couldn't get the resolution in the risk factors because none of the desks had any of the risk factors. So they had improved their office quite a bit. And then that reflected in 45% reduction in the number of lost time injuries as a result of office-related work. And a lot of that comes down to, it's not just the physical factors there, it's a lot of the psychosocial factors. You improved the employee's work-life balance because you gave them an additional work from home day, and they were still able to access all of their work equipment that they needed. The workspaces that they designed were completely height adjustable, both from the chair perspective, the desk perspective, keyboards, monitor arms, all of those things. But the entire office was completely adjustable to that individual worker. Nice. And then if they needed additional accessibility, they had those offices as well. So they made sure that for those individuals who were working, very, very specific jobs, they had all of the resources at their disposal. Right. And it reduced injuries, but it also, from our study, reduced discomfort, it increased productivity, it decreased some of the stress rates, a lot of those things. And they're all like interconnected, right?
Yes.
It's I think part of the issue we see is that you think, okay, ergonomics is in health and safety, and it's about return to work, and buildings are in this camp, and design is in this camp, but really it's everybody working together, and you see benefits in every field. And part of the ROI problem is that sometimes it becomes people see the numbers on ergonomics ROI, and they're like, well, you clearly missed a couple decimal places, because it just seems unrealistic about how much of an impact it can make. But time and time again, the same numbers end up coming through.
There's your ROI information. And I suspect that's probably why the amount of collaboration that occurs between corporate real estate, the architects, interior designers is not really mirrored what's happened in the industry, where the industrial engineers, we got to a point with Chrysler, for example, where we had final say and sign off as to whether the line would start running or not. So that's how much ergonomics is important. And now Chrysler has shareholders, so does Ford. But at the end of the day, we can make a business case for this. And Microsoft, I hear, I mean, most of us are probably investors and shareholders in Microsoft.
And I hope you are all happy.
Yes, yeah. So, but, at the end of the day, everyone is a business. And so really, we need to look at the ROI and understand this. This better. So Marcia, you end up running into this idea of this is going to be an additional cost.
Always.
So it's important, obviously, that we look at data and return on investment.
The data is available. It's not that it's a horrendous effort to get that information. I'm going to say that where this data is. It's a matter of pulling it together in one place. Yeah. And it's not that really difficult. It's just thinking about it, pausing for a minute, and to kind of do it in a logical way and get your business case together, right?
Mm-hmm. So, given that ergonomics and human factors design touches a number of areas, corporate real estate, it actually doesn't belong in HR or health and safety, and that's often where ergonomics is kind of slated in. How do we get the different groups who often are siloed or don't even want to share some of their data? How do we get them to start to come together? And because there's robust data sitting there, but we're not getting at the ergonomic outcomes, we're not getting the mental health outcomes, we're not getting productivity, for example, using technology with Microsoft. How do you propose?
I'll share how we approach this dialogue inside Microsoft. I love a quote from the persons with disabilities community. They call nothing about us without us. Nothing about us without us. It's I want to be part of the table, not as part of the menu, right? Let me be part of this conversation, and I can bring my perspective, my point of view that will influence how we're going to design and make it work. That's really important. So invite people from different perspectives, from different areas to come up together in a conversation and find a solution. That's really important. And you're going to quickly realize, we bring the concept of inclusive design, how unconscious bias can affect us all, especially people not dealing with people with visible disabilities. 70% of disabilities, as Marcia mentioned, are invisible. But they first think that, this person is not capable. Let me help this person. It's the most common unconscious bias that you can ever face. And I would say the most common disability that in our population. It's changed this mindset of understanding that it's about abilities, not disabilities. And it's helping people to see abilities versus disabilities. Through this process, you learn from diversity. So you recognize exclusion, you learn from diversity, you address for one, you extend to many. This is the concept that you apply. The best way is to bring a multidisciplinary team, as Mike was mentioned, designer, engineers, real estate, procurement, HR, legal, all together as a group with stakeholders that will be positively impacted by the decision, and beautiful things will happen. I can show many things today that we are bringing to life. Xbox Adaptive Controller, a gamer that was designed for kids with mobility impairment, or CAI, an app that was designed by blind engineers inside Microsoft that is the #1 app for the blind worldwide. live captions. I can keep saying all the different technology that is coming. It is all coming from and by people with disabilities working inside the company.
I guess there's a couple committees that you can think about in your own organization. You're talking about a health and safety committee. I think it deserves a higher mandate in dealing with diversity, and I don't think it's there in many companies that I've seen, okay? The other one is that accessibility committee, right? Many organizations have an accessibility committee. We're talking about collaboration, and we're talking about teamwork, and we're trying to get that diverse input in. I'm going to share something that was really interesting. I did some accessibility reviews recently, and a volunteer of this organization joined us, and she happened to be in a wheelchair. Go figure, okay? So that kind of blew the minds of our assessors, saying, I have somebody that's actually disabled that wants to come around with us. So the book says one thing, but in practicality, it's different. It's different. So my assessors go into the washrooms, and they're measuring the height of the sink. And you know what? She came to the sink and she says, I can reach. And then going, what? According to the law, you can't reach that. and it was the right height. And she said, so why make an issue of it? And I said, oh my gosh, what an eye-opener, from somebody with a disability saying, don't worry about it. I'm okay, I can adapt. I can adapt. Don't make a big thing about it. No, I loved it. I just love that input that we got from a real person that was using the services.
Yeah, and I think when you're trying to make your case, a lot of what Ricardo was saying about coming from it, or it's like a legal perspective.
Yeah.
One of the great quotes I got from a professor that I had worked with was that deans can't read, but they can count. So what you need to do a lot of times when you're making your case is come at it from the proper perspective.
Yes.
If you're going to say, this is your moral obligation, that type of thing, sometimes that can go whoosh over people's head because they're not seeing a bottom line. But if you start showing, you've now excluded this many people from your hiring pool, you've now excluded this many people from your return to work interventions, or whatever that may be, it's a matter of, you kind of, as an ergonomist, have to learn to speak different languages, depending on who's in the room, but knowing full well that you are speaking about the exact same topic.
Yeah, you get the same outcome, but just arrive at it in a different way.
And this is why, so since I do this full time, a lot of people approach and talk to me, oh, good for you that you do this. Oh, you help people with disabilities. And I look like it sometimes, and I kid you not, last week someone wearing glasses were telling me this, and I was looking at their glasses and say, did they know that this glass is an assistive technology? Did they know that in 1930, persons wearing glasses were considered disabled and they could not get a job? But then a designer came and built beautiful glasses. And I know people who doesn't need to wear glasses that he's wearing because it's fashion. And I was like, why don't we see canes, wheelchair in the same way?
Yeah, exactly.
Why? Why people see wheelchair and they don't see people? Why we were able to achieve such a point to see people, not glasses, and don't worry, people wearing glasses. I love you all. But it's the point.
I can't see you without it. So.
Yeah. but it's the point. It's mismatch of the environment that you are connecting, and these are all assistive technology that help us to be human. What is the point? Am I seeing something?
I think it's mismatched, but I think it's also not. It's also until you're actually brought forward. My partner is deaf and born deaf, and so until I kind of was immersed in that kind of environment, I wasn't aware of all of the roadblocks and all of that kind of stuff that you deal with. You want to make a call to your bank, kind of thing. Well, it's not going to happen now. Now it can. Just recently, the video relay service kind of thing. But we're talking about when having a cell phone. Well, you have to buy a data plan that has phone and data. He's like, I'll never use the phone. I can't. You can call me. I can't hear. But I'm still paying for a data plan that it's just. So it's knowledge. I don't think it's money. It's knowledge.
Right. So the comment, which is excellent here, is someone who's deafened or born deaf, so deaf. So when talking about people who, there's hard of hearing, deaf, and deafened, and it's very important to differentiate those three, particularly in the deaf-deafened community. And give some thought to why there's a difference between someone who's deaf versus deafened. But the point being, with the use of cell phones, where your partner has to buy both the cell phone and the data plan, and yet because he's deaf, he won't be able to use that, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
I had an amazing experience, and I was sharing this experience before during lunch. I went to Brazil to see my colleagues, and I went to a bar, and the barman, he was deaf. And I was like curious, but when I was in my table and I ordered a beer, a black beer, without, how they call colarinho in Portuguese, when you don't want the white part of the beer. I said, yes, a black one without white. He was like, to the guy. What I did, so for those who cannot see what I did sign of one, show a tie that was black, and I make like a cut in my neck showing like a without. But he understood and it came. So the environment was a noisy place, and his ability of communicating sign language made the difference. It wasn't about the technology, it's about the environment. Guess what? The bar and the restaurant realized this as, I can bring potential talents that can help me to better perform, improve collaboration in a noisy environment. Yeah. Beautiful, wonderful. See, that's a perfect example.
Yes. So, yes.
We haven't touched on obesity, and I would just like to see if the panel has any input. We've got 1 in 5 people in Canada that are obese, and if they are in the workforce and looking for accommodation, we're quick at saying, let's get them a bariatric chair, which you're ergocentric, you can obviously be fitted for. However, we have to take into consideration the psychosocial issues and what they're dealing with. And that's possibly the reason why they've been sitting in these chairs that aren't fitting them for as long as they are sitting in them, which has ended up injuring them. So we really have to take it those steps further and understand. Sorry, Mike, I can't see you, but I wanted to touch on your psychosocial.
One of the most, sorry that I talk a lot, so, one of the common requests we have is when during pregnancy, it changed the way you see it in ways. So that's what we had one of our members in our group that reached out, say, I'm afraid to ask for a special chair, but it's really hurting me when I come on. Come on, let's do it. Pick and choose what you want and make it work. But sometimes people don't want to be vocal. They don't want to be tagged as different or a cost. So suffering in silence, that's the one. But I would say that there is really common scenarios not around obese, but temporary and situational disabilities that you can experience in the workplace.
And it ultimately comes down to the exact same principles we were talking about before, right? It's that person has very unique skill set in their workplace, and your workplace is worse off from them not being able to do their job to their full capacity. So it's just as important as anything else. And I had another question. Yep.
Hang on one sec, sorry. I'm going to mic you so that you can be heard, Pina.
I thought I had to do something there. People are yelling, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Mike, yes. Yeah. To your last point, I think the whole conversation here has to be about inclusive design, right? When we talk about the chair for someone who is obese, part of the thing about inclusive design is designing for the marginalized. In this case, you look at the person who is smaller, look at the person who is bigger, looking at the person who is underserved, and so on and so forth, and looking at all those possibilities when you design. You have to consider that. If you don't know, you ask, right? Don't make assumptions. I think that's the biggest mistake people tend to do. I am a person who is visually impaired. I know my disability. I don't know someone's disability who is deafened or who is deaf, as an example. I may know something about it, but I don't live it. And there's a huge difference between knowing about it and living with it. And that's where you want to get some of the information. I think it's so important. But I want to go back to Marcia's point. Marcia, you spoke about trying to get into buildings and not being able to get into. there's a lot of talk right now, about work environments and making work environments busy, accessible. But when you're coming downtown, right, you're going through these buildings. You're going through a path. You're going through the CIBC or TD Tower, or blah, 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 right? These are the way to work, and they have to be equally accessible. And so I think one of our role as accessibility advocates for all those of us who are, understanding this, is to make sure that when there is an issue, to bring it up to the right people, to the right level, and not just accept it. We tend to say, this is, I'm not responsible for it. I'm responsible for this office. Right? The building is managed by so-and-so. Well, let them know, right? Because if they don't know, if they don't hear about it, there's not going to be any changes, right? And I think that's critically important. And just one last point, we talk about workforce of tomorrow, and we talk about the fact that, when you go into a building, nowadays you have to book your office, right? We tend to think about the chairs, the desks, and so on. I want to caution you, particularly for people with invisible disabilities, who need their space sometimes to just breathe, who need to take a break from the noise, from the lights. All of those things have to be also considered. Don't just think about the open office or the open space, and don't assume that the open space, even if you have the right chair and the right desk, will suit everybody's needs, right? So, it's all wonderful work that we're doing, but I think this is where collaboration is so key, because we need to understand the whole situation holistically, and the fact that it'll affect us all.
Good comments?
Good comments.
Yeah,
Yep.
excellent.
Just along those lines, there's an individual with one of the banks that we do a lot of work with who was deafened. And in an open office concept, those people would have a little bit of difficulty in terms of if there's a lot of background noise, for example, then their ability to actually hear what their other team members are saying. So a lot of times what I've found is that this has become the responsibility of HR. When the AODA was released in Ontario, it seemed to have landed in the HR department, but it didn't make its way to corporate real estate or to architects and interior designers. So it's well beyond that, and we had to find a built solution for this individual. So that's a good point, Pina, in terms of we need to think about sensory disabilities as well. Canadians right now, people that are in a wheelchair represent only 5 to 6% of the entire disabled population. So we really need to expand this definition.
Yeah, and there are many parents with strollers here. If we include them in the stats,
Oh my gosh,
yes. Really?
Yeah.
Or the person with the bag in their hand and the coffee, Tim
Yeah,
Hortons in the other, yes.
Double. And I learned
Double.
Double.
and you don't need to do MacGyver. I learned this word, MacGyver.
MacGyver, yes.
Question?
Over here.
And then we have you.
There's a couple here.
And just point it.
I know they are
so that it works.
giving preference for
Okay.
this side,
Okay.
It's not
Okay.
inclusive.
Okay, first, thank you for the three panelists to share really great insights. So myself, I'm a recruiter in the banking industry. So I'm actually familiar with the diversity and inclusion recruitment. So the practice is for the banking industry, for the 5 big banks, I think only 1 or 2 recruiters are working as a diversity and inclusion recruiter. And the practice is if we have a disability talents in the pool, it uses around at least 6 months or even more than 1 year to fill them in the position in the banks. Because we take in different recruitment events and we found the talents, but sometimes there is no suitable roles for them, or for some banking building there is no accessible
Exactly.
way for them. So I mean, like for Ricardo, you are familiar in this industry, like inclusion, you have different companies, schools in the practice, but I mean like the 5 big banks are the largest employer in Canada. Even for them, it's really hard to put it into practice to really help the disability people to find a job. I mean, like the circle is so long, it's take like at least 6 months, even more than 1 year to place them. So yeah, so from your perspective, I mean, like in the future 5 years, what will change? Will there be a huge change? Or if we want to, as a recruiter or like the people who cares about disability, like recruitment, what kind of thing we can do to improve it? Or what kind of the role the government, the society, or the employer could play to improve or speed up the process of helping the disability people find a job?
I love this question. I love this question. You have no idea how much I love this question. It's really common to hear leaders saying, we need to find the right talents for our culture. See the problem with this statement? It's we need to find people to fit to us. We don't fit to people. And that's the first mindset that I see as a mistake. With some banks, not all, some banks are doing a great job, but there are many employees coming to office with GO Train, Metrolinx, TTC, with their laptop, to home, to the office. And why do they come to the office if they can connect with the laptop from home? Oh, the policy here, we don't allow. Our manager, they want to see everyone here in the office. Yeah. That's why people need to come. Right. So what I want to bring here is about the environment, not about the person, again, but there are some things that we need to bring together to this conversation. One is technology. Technology can help you to work remotely. Technology can enable you to create the environment for you in your office. So use tools and technology as a way to help you to create the environment. Second thing, change process to adapt this new workforce. Quick example, check accessibility before you send an email. It's a process. Make your content accessible. So for you to achieve this goal of welcoming, onboarding, you need to change the way you work. You need to train people, which is the third piece, and understand legislation. Think in 4 wheels of the car. First wheel, technology and tools, processes. The other tool is people. The other tool, legislation. To make the engine work is the culture, the mindset of inclusion. If you don't intentionally include, you unintentionally exclude. And when leaders, they have this mindset, my tip is thinking from the leadership, this needs to come top down as a mindset. You need to have leaders embracing this perspective. Luckily, we have a lot of leaders in the banking industry in Canada thinking this way. Many great banks, as an example. All the banks just doing this conversation because we have a legislation in place. But it's still good because they are having this conversation. Before they were not having. Second thing is scale. Once you make it work as a good example with one employee, try to learn and replicate in many other places as you can. Bring stories. All these stories, it's so powerful when you have someone with real name experiencing a real experience. When you understand the story, you can move on. Probably you're going to remember the story that I mentioned for my son. Stories are powerful. And the fourth one is data, as Marcia said. Data. Yeah. So permission, scale, stories, and data is the business case you need to make it work at scale. Thank you so much for this question. This question was, love it.
I think the major thing to remember is, you could walk away from today, and I'm very practical, the practical side of me, that says, wow, we're going to implement this in our organization. We got to do it. We're going to be all inclusive. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. We may have brainwashed you here today, with regards to thinking more positively or reinforcing the ideas that you have already, but you need to come up with a plan, right? You need to think about what strategies do you need to put in place. And you know what? I believe in small wins, right? Show small successes.
Yeah.
Not big plan maybe, but small successes. And say, look at these small things that we can do. It improves productivity, improves inclusionary, right? We've done something small to make a difference in our workplace. And that individual that you've hired Well, you're looking at sustainability. You're looking for that person to stay with your company,
Yeah.
right? Because you know the cost of churn rates with regards to recruiting, right? So just look at retention, 100%.
And as you start to plan, now's the time to get all those voices around the table.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a couple here.
Yes,
Jay.
we have.
There's a gentleman in the back,
We'll
too.
take one more question. Lynn tells me, she's my timekeeper, so.
There's two here.
Two
actually.
questions.
Two questions.
Two more
Five.
questions.
How do we use this? I don't know. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
I've been an interior designer for many years, so I've seen the change. Just imagine, from the 80s, and one of the main problems that I've encountered over the years is, even in the past 10 years, we've been talking about, in the design community, we've been talking about, not just physical, but also, senses as well, smell, everything. Having done healthcare and from healthcare to offices and, you name it, the problem is always, from the beginning of the project, we would like to talk to the right people, but we don't really have the right to kind of request who we should talk. We can suggest, but in most cases, the stakeholders sometimes are not the ones who are using the space, but they are the decision makers.
Yeah.
So it makes it a very difficult process for us. I mean, as designers, we've always been very passionate about, making sure that, their requirements are met. But sometimes even getting down to, okay, what is your, what kind of people are you going to be looking at hiring in the next, basically looking at the operations, but a lot of the operations are confidential. So, and then there are also changes in employees, as more so now than ever, because people do change jobs. So in that respect, it's very difficult for us, to accommodate everybody, but we try to, as much as possible.
Yeah.
And when you talk about fit well now, I mean, there's also a fear. Some of the people that we talk to, that would kind of say, hey, we heard that, because you'd be doing like site measurements and all that, you see, and they say, hey, you're a designer, and then we would start talking to them, so we kind of do our own.
For sure.
And it's really fear, because a lot of them don't want to be singled out. So they don't want the employer or their manager to know they have a disability. So they just suffer in silence.
No, agreed.
And that happens a lot.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I don't know how that can be resolved. Even advocates, even though there are companies or even hospitals have advocates, patient advocates, but it's not really for the patient. I've had that experience. Mm-hmm. The first thing they ask you is, you have a problem with one of the staff, right? Are you going to sue? That's the first thing they ask you.
Yeah, it's a risk issue.
Yeah, it's a risk thing. It's not really an advocate.
It is. I think the biggest challenge is to have the right level of this, find the right people with the right level and authority to have this conversation and unlock this potential, right? And here's the reality. You have people with power who cares, people with power who doesn't care, people without power who cares, and people without power who doesn't care. That's what we have.
That's exactly.
We all made mistakes looking for people with power.
Yeah.
We should look first people who care. That's the very first. Find people who care.
It's easier said than done, but I can tell you, even as I was fortunate enough, part of my career that I was fortunate enough that I actually worked for an architect, for 12 years. Yeah. So, and he did a lot of, healthcare, like he did the McMaster, health science, sick kids and all that. And the advantage to that is that, in that particular office, the way it operates, we actually work very closely, the interior designers and the engineers and the spec writers and everything. So in that respect, it's more, but not all offices are like that. And also interior designers tend to, like if it's a separate company, the architects would do their building and then they hire the interior design firm to do the work. And in most cases, we try to adapt, to the space and try to make it work, for the clients.
Missing from this, though, you're designers. You're designing for human beings.
Yes.
And there are human factors specialists that we work in industry. They figured out that you need our knowledge. And one of the main themes of this talk is we have to have people that know about human beings' capabilities at all abilities and sizes. We need to also be part of the people, and we can help in finding the right level.
We have, but the problem is it's on the client side, right? It has to do with, if we request that, we work with a lot of specialties if it's part of the contract. It always comes down to money. So we can request it, but we don't always get it. Yeah, it's like working with security consultants. If it's on the table, sure. We're really open. As designers and architects, we're really open.
It's more about your positioning and how you want to do your business.
Exactly.
I'll give an example.
Yeah.
There was a webcast that people want to join me, and I just asked, do you have live captions? Oh, we don't. It's too expensive. I'm not going to join. Sorry. Yeah. It's the positioning you're going to make is trade-offs, but it's also about your positioning on how you do business and on what you work. And if you create this reputation behind you, people are going to call you with an open space in the contract because you bring a value that no one is asking.
No one else is asking.
It's also a mindset on how you play with the system. And I know that there are many more things to put in perspective. It's easy said than implement. I get it. There are many things. But it's also the mindset how we play as we position ourselves in our beliefs, in our mission, and how we do business. And if these are the principles you have to work as a design for interior, making environments that are modern, accessible, and inclusive, that's what you do. Don't reach out, don't knock my door if you're not approaching this from this concept. I'm not going to do business with you.
We do, when I was with the architectural firm, we actually have an architect who is a physiotherapist, so that really helped. But we do research in that, don't get me wrong, it's not like, we do a space, we just kind of pick a chair because we like it. We do look at all of that. We work with manufacturers and find out all the different, things that you can do. Mm-hmm. We do our own research. I mean, that's part of it. But when it comes to hiring consultants, that's a different story. It just does not happen all the time. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. People must think that we make big bucks, that we're a very expensive resource. We're not talking about an expensive resource. One more question, and we'll wrap things up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try to keep it short because I know we're short on time. A quick comment and a question. The comment, Ricardo, what you were saying, something that I find really interesting about the glasses example you gave. It's great that we can tell stories and share experiences, but how long that lasts and how much policy that changes over time is a little more questionable. Mm-hmm. And a perspective that I've come to, I write in the space of disability ethics, I'm a UX researcher as well, is if anyone here has heard of third age suits or empathy tools, where you actually put someone in the perspective of being blind, being deaf, having their movement restricted in old age, the comment about being disabled at some point in your life, whether through age or illness, is very powerful. Yeah. But really, we can talk and you can look on social media and see all the positive messaging, but really getting that understanding. The glasses example highlights something where I've seen in one disabled group not really empathizing with another, or when you have tokenism and limited hiring in a company, how hard it is to really get everyone to see each other's perspective, let alone people that are doing the management of the issues. So the question that I wanted to ask, and it's something I ask a lot, is in the invisible disability space, so anything with mental health and cognitive disability, and the checkbox that at least some bigger companies, I'm pretty sure Microsoft, Facebook for sure, when they ask you to disclose at the beginning, it's an easy thing to include to make a statement or to show that you're trying to be inclusive, but I do wonder how to encourage people when the right time it is to disclose and how much they should have to mention in the hiring process at the risk of losing the opportunity.
Love it. I would say three things. The very first thing, before I forget, in a humble way, we are on a journey. Accessibility is a journey. We are making progress. We are happy with the progress we are making, but we have a lot of work to do. So the word that I hope you can leave, humble. I can share all the problems we are facing, and we have tons of problems inside Microsoft around accessibility and inclusion. That's the very first thing. And accessibility will never be a point that I am accessible. I don't have any problem. It's always an ongoing conversation. Think about this as a journey. Back to your point of glasses, I'm glad you like it. I'll give another one. I was visiting a customer 2 weeks ago, and I joined the meeting. There were 3 people using wheelchair in the meeting that they were there first, and no one else in the room. We decided to take all the chairs from the room. And when the people arrived, they started to realize something was weird until someone asked, where are the chairs? And someone in the wheelchair said, oh, sorry, I brought mine. I thought you would bring yours.
Very good.
It's always nice to play in ways that you can. But back to your answer of a question around disclaiming or not disclaiming mental health, open to the person. I think if you create trust in the system, in the culture where people can disclaim, raise their hand, tell, it's going to be an opportunity for everyone around to learn. That's the very first insight. The second thing, there are adjustments in process that you can make in training people to avoid the situation where people, they don't want to disclaim their disabilities and they don't need to. Example, check accessibility before you share a document. Or you have a presentation, make accessible content, share the presentation 1 day before the meeting. People with learning disabilities and dyslexia will be able to consume the content and be prepared for the meeting. Give space during the meeting for questions, topics where people can take note and say, so it's more about the attitude and how you design your work day that you can be mindful. Again, when you are including intentionally, you are not excluding unintentionally, right? I think it's the top that you're saying. And thank you for the work you're doing, which is bring this perspective and help people to see their bias.
Yeah, I agree.
Just to add on to that as well, though, I do think to some extent companies need to have some self-awareness around where their stressors lie. And I think it's been very easy to go out with a force gauge and see how much weight you have to lift. It's very easy to go out and see the reach distances and that. It's been a lot harder to capture, the things that do cause stress in a workplace that can be a barrier to somebody who's got mental health conditions. So, understanding your workplace, and there's the new CSA standards on psychological health. There's a great resource through the Occupational Health Clinic for Ontario Workers called Stress Assess, which can give you a lay of the land of your organization and where those barriers lie. And then, taking those hard looks internally and saying, you know what, we should probably give people 2 days to work from home. Or we need to make sure that people have that area where they can go and have some quiet, because we've got this nice big open space, but that's a lot of sensory overload for people. So it's hard to measure those things, but there are tools that are getting better to help measure, that is a challenge in ergonomics as well.
Microsoft Japan, they decided to do an experiment, reducing 1 day of the week for work.
Yeah.
So instead of having 5 days, 4 days. They increased productivity by 40%. And all the employees from Microsoft worldwide are begging to have the same everywhere. But it's a good example of trying and figuring out outcomes, right?
Actually, I was just going to say that I do accessibility training, and I put the participants through an exercise of experiencing, put your butt in a wheelchair, put some blinders on and find your way through as a wayfinding from the front door to this boardroom. And they're shocked. They're totally shocked, but it brings them, they're on our side now, right? From an awareness. They said, oh, I didn't realize how difficult it was to find the washroom. So just FYI. Yeah, we're all together.
So we'll just take this time to wrap up. Just a few of us will probably still be around. We know that you've got to go show some proper pitching technique for people. Where in Scarborough is that?
Just off Kennedy.
Okay. Good. So we'll just wrap things up. Hopefully you also got to know about the adjustability in your chairs while you were sitting and listening. I didn't see a lot of people. We often have technology, we have things. Your smartphones also have accessibility features in it, similar to the chairs that you were sitting in. So we've had a good, diverse review of this. one of the statistics that I recently saw, so approximately 20% of Canadians have disabilities currently, and we've got another large percentage of people who are aging, who by virtue of aging have disabilities. One of the problems is only 4% of Canadian executives will actually disclose if they have a disability. So I'll leave you with that thought that if we don't have the C-suite disclosing, how are we going to get our employees to also start to have that conversation? And that may be where we really need to start to look and make the changes that are required to get to the Microsoft level. So thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. And we can take the chair home, right?
Yeah.
It's ours.
Comfortable.